starting point for me was a 13-year-old girl that appears in court for truancy. And the judge calling her case, the young lady approaches the bench, reads the charge, asks her how she pleads, and she says guilty. The judge simply says, okay, I'll find you guilty. I'm imposing a fine of $90. You have 90 days to pay that fine. If you do not pay that fine in 90 days, your driver's license will be suspended when you're eligible to get one. That took around 11 seconds. When she came to get her paperwork, I said, young lady, why don't you go to school? She was a young Native girl, maybe 13. And she said, every morning when I wake up, my mother is with a different man, and my friends tease me. That's when I saw that system did not work at all. It took a young girl that was seeking help from a system that's supposed to protect her, and it punished her.
The legal system that we deal with in the United States and wherever else that we have common origins in the legal system is an adversarial system. So the whole goal is basically to put up the best fight. Whoever puts up the most convincing fight wins. Well, neither side really wins a lot of the time because both sides walk away with bruises, right? And if you imagine that the two sides were just individuals trying to work it out, it's kind of like might makes right, or whoever wins the fight wins, right? The problem's not necessarily solved at all in that case. And so you got to question the roots of the doctrine, right? And within tribal communities, and I'd say that, everybody comes from a tribal tradition. They may have forgotten it, but everybody's indigenous to somewhere in their roots. And those people learned how to live together over long periods of time without harming each other irreparably, without walking around with grudges all the time. And so if we look to cultures that are still reflective of their origins, of indigenous cultures, then I think we're going to see a better way of doing things a lot of times. The Native American Rights Fund is the nation's oldest and largest nonprofit law firm devoted to protecting and advancing Indian rights. And so they've been working since the early 1970s to protect all sorts of Indian rights. One of their projects has been the Indigenous Peacemaking initiative, which started about 1992 at NARF. And since that time, they've been trying to keep their hands in supporting tribal efforts to revive Native dispute resolution processes, typically called peacemaking.
The peacemaking process is about identifying issues, problem solving, and developing common sense consensus solutions that work for people in the community. Community harmony may be at stake beyond individual wellness and healing for individuals and supporting and encouraging people to realize the fullest of their potential and to live their life in a good way. Philosophically, for us Anishinaabe people in Michigan and the Great Lakes area, we call it Mano Benatsoen. And really it means living your life in a good way.
When we do restorative, we use our traditional values, and one of those being love. So in a court systems, those kind of systems, there is no love, and that's a lot of it. But traditional values are what we want to teach our children. Our people that missed out on hearing those because of our effects of boarding school era, that weren't given our traditional values, our stories, our teachings, those kind of things. And today I think when we talk about cultural identity, that's who we are those values. That's what we learn throughout our life.
In Cake, they all know each other. So they all know who the victim is, or they all know who the wrongdoer is, and they know the backstory. Whereas you take them to outside the system, they only see the wrongdoing. They don't even pay attention to the victim, right? So they're not there to fix or to help. So the beauty of Peacemaking Circle is that it's place-based. It should be right in the community and designed by the community members.
We were requested to do a healing circle in a tribal community where there was a murder. A young man killed his father. And we did, and we had 60-some community people in the circle. It lasted roughly 9 hours. But the community got to express their grief, their frustrations, their pain. But the beautiful part of this circle is that the young man that killed his father was allowed to call a cell phone in the circle, his aunt's cell phone, from the jail. And put on speakerphone, he became part of the circle. And it was so enlightening to know that they didn't condone the fact that he killed his father. But they all had positive things to say about this young man. He worked with kids. He was teaching them weaving and different cultural things. And now this community suffers the loss of what they thought would be a future leader, and because he's probably going to be incarcerated for some time. They lost a tribal member who died, and they were very concerned about this. And at one point, this young man said, "Is my grandpa there?" And they said, "Yes, Grandpa's here." And he said, "I love you, Grandpa." And Grandpa said, "I love you too." They'd never spoken those words in their life. And what the community was talking about, he'd done a terrible thing, but he was still a good human being. That young man's re-entry program started that day, and he hadn't even been to court yet.
We are overly represented in so many of the demographics that tear at our heartstrings. And I think if more people had a chance to really connect with their culture, of which peacemaking, Wowahwala Wichoni, is a part of that, that we would deter and put so many people on a completely different trajectory. And right now, the place where peacemaking can happen is through tribal courts.
When I started, this was one of my primary responsibilities that NARF wanted me to pick up and run with, and that's the first time they've devoted serious staff attorney time to advance in the Indigenous Peacemaking Initiative, or IPI. What we've done with that is just try to build it out so that it's there to serve tribal interests. We focus the priorities of the project based on some surveys that we've done of tribal justice system employees and other workers over the years. And what those priorities are first to provide just basically an information bank for tribes where tribes can share information about how they've implemented traditional dispute resolution systems or recovered their previous systems or whatever with other tribes who might be interested in seeing how they did it. Second off, we also provide training if we're qualified. So we have an advisory committee that consists of about a dozen of the leaders in the field of peacemaking who've been doing the work for 30 years or, in some cases, a long time like that. And those people are sometimes available to go out and train other tribal members in how to do stuff, how to do effective peacemaking, and also how to implement peacemaking within an existing system or existing government or judicial structure. And then finally, we provide advocacy when appropriate. So we help to promote peacemaking as a viable option within tribal communities, and then also try to promote the legitimacy and encourage people within the state and federal systems to take tribal dispute resolution systems or traditional cultural dispute resolution systems as something worthy of a lot of consideration, a lot of deference. The decisions that come out are good and solid.
I went through this training. I became a facilitator, and we held a circle in Northway. And what I noticed about it is that they were ready to embrace anything different.
They said, "Exactly what do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I want to address, first of all, petty offenses. And I wanted to bring people out together to come up with a resolution that everyone could live with. or to make amends to their community. And I asked for their support. And they said, sure, we'll support that. And that's how I got started.
And what I noticed is everybody was enthusiastic. They showed up before, usually people are late. They were early. We had our preacher come. It's like we define what works in our community. And that to me is the beauty of Peacemaking Circle, is we define what works for us.
When I decided early on that I needed to explore more culturally appropriate options for resolving conflicts and disputes in our own tribal community, I was told that I could never do that because in Michigan, tribal people had been so assimilated that we would never know what the traditional law was. Well, even if that's true, we know what the traditional process was. And the process was bringing people together on the circle and trusting the circle to provide the answers as people talk things through.
One day, an elderly man came, and my idea of being a judge is like the way how another non-Inuit would run the proceeding. So this elderly man stood up and raised his hand, wanted to say something. So I told him, you better sit down. And he kept raising his hand. I says, if you don't, I'm gonna, cite you with contempt, for interfering with a judicial proceeding. So he sat down, but I never forgot that experience. And there was many times I thought about, what if I had allowed him to speak? What would he have said? Here's an elderly man who looked like he knew quite a bit about what was going on. And I thought, but if I allowed him to speak, imagine he would have gave some really good pieces of his wisdom, direction. And so this is what I think about the problem, and these are the options we should think about. A Navajo, an elderly man, a man or a woman can say that, even to this day.